Our last protostome group, which is also part of this branch of Ecdysozoans, is phylum Arthropoda, the arthropods. Arthropods are the largest phylum among eukaryotes, so most of the diversity that you see in animals is contained within this phylum. Arthropods share a couple of common features. They all have jointed appendages, which helps out for fine manipulation of objects, for quick and precise movements, and quick and efficient locomotion. And jointed appendages are really where they get their name from. If you look at the etymology or the word roots of the name of the phylum, arthro means joints or jointed, and poda means foot or leg. Because they are ecdysozoans, all arthropods have a cuticle, and the cuticle in this case is composed of chitin, as opposed to collagens, which is what the cuticle of nematodes was composed of. Chitin is our same kind of macromolecule, same kind of material as the cell walls in fungi. Depending on how the chitin is oriented, the cuticle can either be tough and brittle, or it can be soft and flexible. If you've ever eaten a crab, or even just seen or held a crab, you can compare the exoskeleton on the back of the crab to the exoskeleton in that same crab's joints. Right? It's not only thinner, but the actual composition and substance of the cuticle in that area is just softer and more flexible, where the two arm segments need to bend. At some point in the life cycle of arthropods, they have a segmented body plan. So similar to segmented worms, a body plan where there's many repeating segments in sequence, just in a long line. When you look at the adult stages of a lot of different arthropods, it may seem like there is reduced segmentation. A lot of the segments at some point in development have fused together into larger body portions, especially when you look at something like a spider that has these two principal body segments, but isn't really a whole bunch of separate segments like, say, this centipede. But if you look at an embryonic spider that's still in the egg, it has a body plan that is much more similar to what this looks like, with many repeating segments, and really only gets this fusion of body segments later on during its development. In terms of what people are familiar with, there are four major groups of arthropods. There are crustaceans, there are chelicerates, which is the group that contains arachnids, there are hexapods, commonly referred to as insects, and myriapods, which is a grouping that contains millipedes and centipedes. So these are the groupings that we're going to focus on within arthropods, but as with most things, the actual groupings or actual phylogeny is a little more complicated. This is a phylogeny of the diversity within phylum Arthropoda. And something that you might notice when you look at these different groups, even though these are all sort of on the same level as each other, some of these groupings are classes, some of these groupings are orders. Down here, you'll see that there are different subphyla, so different names with different groupings. Our knowledge of phylogenetics is constantly growing, which allows us to reorganize groups into more accurate trees that better reflect the true ancestry of these lineages. But the taxonomy, the original names given to a lot of the categories of animals, have been in use since Linnaeus first developed his system of classification, published in the late 1700s. And people are really attached to these names, and science is really accustomed to using them, right? Insects, crustaceans, arachnids, these are old names. But as a result of new phylogenies, we get some awkward dissonance in classification where our groupings don't really line up with regards to level of classification. So this is why you see these sort of different levels with what you might expect, right? So insects are a class, but something like spiders are an order, and crustaceans are a subphylum. And this happens when we uncover new relationships and rearrange things, and it sort of shifts around the different names. In any case, all of the following belong to phylum Arthropoda. Within arthropods, there are about 1.1 million described species, and an estimated 2 to 3 million more that are yet unknown or undiscovered. So with these numbers, that forms 2/3 of all animals. So most of the diversity within animals is just within this phylum. This diagram that's shown here only includes terrestrial arthropods. So it doesn't show crustaceans, it doesn't show sea spiders, and a few other things. But it's still a handy diagram that you can look at to see how that diversity is broken down. You can see that out of terrestrial arthropods, almost a quarter of it is flies. You can see that about a sixth of it is the diversity of spiders, a sixth of it is beetles, and then another about sixth of it is Hymenoptera. These are your bees, wasps, and ants. Arthropods are really, really widely distributed. They're in pretty much every kind of ecosystem, and they're ubiquitous and they're numerous. They're on and inside almost every surface. A really interesting thought experiment is if you took away all of the matter from the planet, just made it disappear, except for the matter that was in insects, what you would be left with is a shadow of the Earth. You would still see the shapes of houses, you would still see the shapes of trees, and you would still see the topography of the landscape, because there's so much biomass of insects present and inside of every surface that if everything disappeared except for insects, you would still see the shape of everything, basically. Arthropods have a really, really great fossil record. The exoskeleton that they have is able to persist and stay behind in things like compression fossils, and then also in amber fossils, where insects are being trapped in tree sap, and then that gets hardened over time underground. So we do know a lot of evolutionary relationships based on the fossils of arthropods we've been able to find. Arthropods are the first group of animals to have evolved flight, and arthropods were the first animals to move onto land. In arthropods, there is a segmented body plan at some point during development, and this allows for lots of adaptive modifications. If you have lots of repeating body segments, if something is mutated or wrong or doesn't develop properly in one of those segments, you have lots of other segments that are still functioning properly. So it's not as much of a hit. It's not as much of an imposition on an individual's fitness or ability to survive and reproduce. If you think about the human body, if you had some genes for bone growth that weren't properly expressed in your legs as you were developing, you would have a significant handicap to survival and reproduction, particularly if you were a hominid living 50,000 years ago. No surgery, no wheelchairs. But the basic body plan for the ancestral arthropod has many repeating segments with many appendages. And if there are mutations and modifications to structures that significantly change one pair of legs, you still have a bunch of functional legs to get along just fine. And those changes to one set of appendages might give you a different kind of advantage. Like if you have a set of appendages that becomes more flattened or has a bunch of bristles growing on it, it may be better for swimming or detecting vibrations better. So basically, having many repeating body segments and not needing all of them to function at 100% in order to be fit gives evolution some room to play. It allows for experimentation, so to speak, on a long time scale without repercussions. And this is why in arthropods we see a lot of diverse appendages. lots of different sensory appendages, different kinds of feelers and antennae, some for picking up vibrations, some for smelling, different kinds of pheromones. We see appendages that are specialized for different kinds of feeding, chewing mouthparts, piercing, sucking mouthparts, filter feeding mouthparts. We see different kinds of appendages on different segments for locomotion, used for climbing, jumping, swimming, and also different appendages used for reproduction. Though their entire body is segmented during development, in several groups we see fusion of segments as they mature. So especially in something like insects, there's several segments during development that will then fuse into a single body segment, like the thorax or the abdomen. We refer to them as a whole body section, but in development it's multiple segments fused together that form that structure, like the thorax or the abdomen.